What is happening, super fans? You're listening to Behind the Mask, the show where we chat with your favorite superhero fiction authors about the worlds and heroes they are writing. Behind the Mask is brought to you in conjunction with the amazing folks over at superherofiction.com. I'm your host, Franklin Kendrick, and today on the show, I am excited to be chatting with Karen Janowsky. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. So, first question is the hardest one, or it could be the easiest one, depending on how secretive you want to be. But when you're not a superhero behind the keyboard writing superhero fiction, what is your secret identity out in the real world?
Well, there's not much out in the real world these days, but I teach writing. I teach college writing at a couple different universities, and now I'm doing it virtually. And I also had been teaching yoga, but of course that kind of has to be done in front of people, so that's fallen by the wayside a bit.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I know some people have been doing like video courses for their kids, like extracurriculars, where it's kind of like usually they're in a room together doing it. Now it's like make sure the camera's positioned so you can see
Right.
how to do the karate moves or like basically the Pilates moves. It's a whole new world.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So turning to writing, and reading, I suppose. What got you into writing originally, and then what sort of steered you towards working in the superhero fiction genre?
Well, I've been writing since I was about 5 or 6, and I'm not sure exactly what got me into writing, but I've never not been writing. And eventually I completed a whole graduate degree in English focusing on creative writing. It's just kind of part of my whole identity at this point. And as far as superheroes, like I think a lot of people, I started with fandom. And I'm not as avid a follower of the genre as many of my friends are, but superheroes and ancient mythology have been sources of fascination to me since I was young. And there's a lot of overlap between the two. What I loved about mythology was that these frighteningly powerful, nearly perfect beings were all too human in their problems, in their dramas, and their proclivities. And when they made selfish or short sighted mistakes, the whole world was affected. You don't have to look much farther than the story of Demeter and Persephone to see that. The whole world shuts down every time Persephone goes back down to the underworld because her mother is in mourning. And superheroes are modern day mythological gods, and they suffer the same problems and possess similar powers as the gods once did. And even though we don't worship the ancient pantheons anymore, we do need our heroes still, and we still need to see them overcome struggle. So, for example, the Flash can either save Iris and his friends, but it will create a rip in the fabric of time if he tries to do that.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we all want to have our cake and eat it too. So Barry Allen will try to do it all, and when he does, he causes another, usually even bigger potential disaster, just like the rest of us do on a small scale. So superheroes attract me conceptually because of their heightened humanity.
That's very awesome. You're not the first person that I've chatted with who focuses on like the mythology side of things. They are really like these characters, the big names, and then a lot of the smaller like indie ones. Like they really are drawing from like classical mythology, and it's so timeless.
Yeah, then it's interesting because a lot of those superheroes draw from a combination of that and socio-political issues, like Superman and Captain America and Wonder Woman all came from particular social concerns that the writers had. Superman's an immigrant from the 1930s. He's the whole immigrant experience. He's the hero of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that part of it that's kind of fascinating to me too, how much they reflect and shape what we think about the world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I also love how, because some of these heroes that we've read for like decades, how they've kind of like evolved as like society and culture has evolved, like Captain America and Wonder Woman. It's like they stood for something very simple back in the day, but now they're like way more complex than they were when they started.
Captain America, not as much as Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman was always a little complicated because Marston meant her to be that way.
Mhm.
He meant to reshape the psychology of how we envision women in the first place and to make them assume a more powerful paradigm than they traditionally were placed in. Captain America was all about hitting the bullies, whether they were Nazi or the KKK or now police brutality. There's nothing wrong with knocking over Nazis, as far as I'm concerned. That's always
They're always a good villain.
yeah.
I love it. Oh, goodness. So turning the spotlight onto your series, and I'll give the title now because I have done my research. So you have a superhero series called The Persistence of Memory, and it's a superhero romance series. Can you give us kind of like an overview of what your series is about? And then you can jump into my next question at the same time, which is, who are the heroes of this series?
Well, the series is actually a mix of genres that feature superpowered people, and eventually it turns also into erotic romance, but it also has time travel and it also has mythology. And the first three books are serialized, so each book has some closure, but not everything gets resolved until the end of book three. And all of the books, including the standalone prequel that's available for pre-order, feature some fairly weighty themes as far as superhero fare goes. So there's sexuality, there's post-traumatic stress, there's basically figuring out who you are and where you belong in the world. And so they're definitely for the 18 and up crowd. And I've had to, I will say, turn away grandparents at book fairs and it's like, because they'll say, oh, my 13-year-old grandson is very good with adult words and he's a good reader. And I'll say, no, you don't understand.
Yes.
These
Oh,
are
goodness.
adult books. And then their eyes get really big and they go, oh, okay,
Oh,
well,
yes.
good luck.
Oh my goodness. That reminds me. So I have a quick anecdote about that for grandparents personally. I have a great aunt. She basically my grandmother's sister. She would always give me and my sisters books for Christmas. And one year she happened to give hand-me-downs of ones that she had read. And one of those particular style books slipped in, and it was probably the most hilarious thing. Watch my mom go through the stack of books being like, these are all pretty good. What is she thinking? Oh, goodness.
But yeah, as far as the heroes themselves, they're kind of a dysfunctional group. I made a decision to lean more toward Marvel type of heroes than DC. So they're powerful, but they have a lot of limitations. Mm-hmm. And I tried to balance the group in terms of what each character was good at and where they fell short. So there's always someone or something bigger, stronger, or smarter, or better organized than they are. So the main character, Daniel, is sort of like a Captain America character. He's a modified human, but unlike Captain America, he was experimented on by Nazis against his will. He never wanted to be in the military. He never wanted to be a symbol of anything, but he ended up in many ways like Captain America at the beginning was a borrowed symbol for his time period. And he's strong and he's good at planning and leading, but he fights from an emotional place a lot of the time. And he's a lot more willing to risk his life than he is his feelings. The other main character, Nina, is a demigoddess. And she's also as strong as he is. She can fly. She's worshipped as the leader in battle, though, from an ancient time, and has a very hard time following someone else's orders. She's not in charge. And the parameters of what she's allowed to do in terms of fighting in the 21st century are very different. You can't go around just spearing your enemies through that.
Yes.
It's frowned upon. It creates all kinds of PR nightmares. Another character, Kevin, can only see is a veteran. He came back wounded, and he only is able to survive and be mobile because he has this endoskeleton somebody created for him. And it gives him flight and a ranged attack and super strength as well, and it makes him bulletproof. But that endoskeleton is also excruciatingly painful all the time. So
Mm.
he's got to decide how often he really wants to activate it in order to save the day. I've got a character who can explode himself and control fire. I've got a speedster who is such a popular side character that she's getting her own book pretty soon. And they're all essentially very damaged individuals whose underlying struggles are often they're in their own group dynamics.
Nice. Well, not nice for them that they have struggles, but as readers, it's like I love the drama of it all. I love the like internal conflict for characters,
Right.
and especially when so much is at stake for them normally, and then with all of their abilities and what they can do, it's like, oh boy.
Right. And I didn't want the superhero aspect or the powers to be the stars of the show. I wanted it to be the characters.
Mhm. So how did you start coming up with your characters? Did you start with emotionally what you wanted them to be dealing with before you decided what sort of abilities they were going to have?
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, it was very much all the characters searching for a plot for a very long time at the beginning of writing it. And if I'm going to be 100% honest, I'll admit that really what started it was an arguably unhealthy obsession with a particular actor who plays a particular character in a series of movies. But but it moved beyond that, and I actually did ask several comic book fans and superhero aficionados, is this derivative? Do I have to
Mhm.
change it? They eventually said, nope, there are a couple of parallels, but that's just a trope. You're good.
Mhm.
Uh, so yeah, I started out with the characters and the relationship issues that they have in communication and in working together. And the bad guy came later when it just kind of clicked. Oh, I know who it is. I know who's doing this and why. It took a while.
Oh. I feel like that is something that is not really talked about when writers are speaking a lot to readers about how they craft their work, is that sometimes, especially for me, I'll go through bursts where everything comes so easily and I know who the characters are, but then it's like your creative brain just needs to mull it over. Like even if you push forward and you sit in the chair and type something, it's like your imagination needs to get you there, and it takes
Kind
however
of,
long it takes.
yeah, and I get this question all the time, and I see it on Facebook in groups a lot. How do you deal with writer's block? And my answer is usually there's no such thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
discipline and there is lack of discipline. If you're a writer, you write, and it might be crap all day long, every day for 2 weeks or more. But you have to keep doing it. Eventually, something will break through. But there's also that other part of it. You can't obsess over it because
Mm-hmm.
then you are going to keep kind of hitting a wall and having a hard time moving forward with anything.
Absolutely. It's like and you never know the stuff that you think might be crap, you leave it in a file folder somewhere, and then a year down the line, you might look back at it and say, "Hmm, I, I
Oh,
didn't know I could use this."
there have been in all 4 books, including the one that's coming out soon, things that I left in the books by accident. They were placeholders and I thought they were stupid, but okay, yeah, something happened. Here's basically what it is. And the editor will come back and say, oh my God, this is the best part.
Mhm.
And I'm never sure how to take that because that's the part that I thought was stupid. And I worked so hard crafting all the stuff around it that they're crossing out left and right. But oh yeah, this happens too. Great.
It's like a case of being too close to your own creation to really see the overall. You're stuck in all the details.
Yeah.
So what about this villain? Are you able to talk about who they are, or is it kind of like a spoiler to
If I
discuss them?
said who it was in the trilogy, it would be a huge spoiler. I can
Okay.
say that I tried to make the supervillains as relatable as the heroes. If you think back to other popular storylines, Killmonger and Black Panther and Magneto and the X-Men are really good examples of villains that achieve that. You know exactly where they're coming from. You know how they're feeling and why. they're just going about it really totally the most destructive, wrong way possible. Even Thanos came from
Hmm.
a place of a warped but noble set of intentions and Avengers. I used to teach English literature, and people sometimes complain that I ask students to identify Lucifer's positive traits in Paradise Lost and explain his argument against heaven. So, in order to have a believable challenge for the protagonists, we need to be able to empathize with the villain. They need to have legitimate, sympathetic reasons for their attitudes. So, it can be emotional to watch them make all these destructive decisions. And as far as Satan or Adam in Paradise Lost, I mean, who hasn't rebelled against a parent or an authority figure? And who hasn't felt like their punishment was disproportional to the infraction?
Hmm.
So, as I mentioned, personal decisions have far reaching consequences when you're that powerful, no matter what side you're on, for whatever reasons.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah. Oh, just just hearing about it makes me think like, oh, you can think back of like just as a normal human being. Sometimes you have a conversation with somebody where you think, oh my gosh, I should have never said that. I should have kept it to myself. And then to be somebody with like superpowers where it's literally like you could destroy someone's life physically,
Yes.
and then at the same time also,
Yeah.
you're dealing with the emotions of a human being. It's like, oh boy,
Yeah.
no.
I mean, think about what, you have an argument with your spouse and the rest of your family over where you're going to be spending Thanksgiving, and you end up with a bunch of people with hurt feelings and some grudges.
Hmm.
You have superheroes fighting over stuff, and it's going to run a little deeper for a lot of people and much
Oh
more.
yeah, an entire building is gone, or
Or a human
real.
being is gone, or a group of them.
Yes.
We were talking about Nazis a second ago, and they're those kinds of bad guys are really easy to set up because we have an automatic I hate them attitude, hopefully.
Hmm.
But it also makes the story kind of flat. There's not a lot of layering or depth beneath it. That's part of why I made Daniel come from the Holocaust, because I wanted there to be a lot of stuff, a lot of issues and trauma to have to deal with as he contends with the big bad guy.
Hmm. Definitely. So I have a question about the Daniel character.
Okay.
So he's coming from he time travels to present day.
Right.
Is there a huge sort of, I mean, obviously there would be culture shock, but I feel like I had a discussion with somebody the other day relating to this time period, because technology back then was obviously not the same as it is now. So communication was not as instant. How crazy is it for him to be in a place where like you film something and you have to go get it developed and then played in a movie theater, whereas now communication is like instantaneous and it's almost impossible to keep secrets.
By the time we see Daniel in the 21st century, he's been there for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
So he's already gone through the worst of the culture shock.
Okay.
And at this point, one of his main conflicts is that he doesn't see himself the way other people see him. People, as far as he's concerned, see the public persona. They see the big, handsome, powerful guy who's running in to save the day. But as far as he's concerned, he's just some regular, scrawny kid from New York City who, during the Depression, and nobody thought twice about him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he has this kind of dysmorphia going on with his self-image. So by the time we get to meet him in the 21st century, he pretty much has resigned himself to being a public persona and wishing that he could just walk into his apartment at the end of the day like a robot, put himself in a closet, turn himself off. There's nothing more to his life.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't until he meets Nina, and everybody else knows who she is, but nobody else, but she doesn't, and he doesn't. They have amnesia. But by the time she re-enters his life, since they met before, things start to turn around. As they start remembering things, as they start remembering each other, more dimension gets added and more thought about what he really wants from his life
Mm-hmm.
become issues. do I really want to be a hero? Is there more to this?
Excellent. I love the it's totally related to the romance genre and also like stories that have romantic elements in them. I just love the whole two characters where it's kind of cliche. They don't complete each other, but they help each other to work out issues that they would struggle with forever on their own. I just love that sort
Yeah.
of.
I was talking to somebody else for a women's writing group, and she had asked also about Wonder Woman, and the fact that in the movie, and I don't remember it this way, but I haven't seen it in a long time, but she doesn't come into her actual full power angry goddess mode until after she hooks up with Steve Trevor. And I
Mhm.
said, if they had made it into a kind of a magic penis thing going on, then I would object. But there's nothing wrong with the theme of two people's connection and love making you more of what you were, bringing out your best.
Mhm.
It's not the same thing as she needed a man, he needed a woman to make him what he is. It's got to be more dimensional than that.
Oh yes, and me being the hopeless romantic, when I watch that movie, even when I rewatch it, that whole scene, the whole dancing outside in the snow scene,
Mm-hmm.
like the the layers of like subtext where he's totally out of his element. He never imagined he would end up with somebody as like crazy amazing as her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she is looking at everything through like an epic lens.
Yeah,
And
it's all.
then she doesn't realize the she isn't like brought down to like the human level until after they have that like tiny back and forth about like, so what are you going to do when this giant war is over? And he's like, and he's listing off all these things, and she's thinking of like giant epic, like I'm gonna do this, and it's like he's just telling her like, I guess I'm gonna, have breakfast and eat food, and she's like, oh, and it's like where she comes from, she's been trained to be a warrior, and so he's introducing her to kind of like, you don't always have to be at 100. You can have a normal life as well if you want, if that's what you want.
Right.
So I
And
love
me,
that.
yeah, and Mina was based in part, not completely, but in part on that aspect of Wonder Woman. And
Mhm.
there is this, she wants more than anything else once she realizes she's not human to be
Mhm.
human and live
Yes.
a normal life, but she has no idea what that means. So and she also is the only character in the book that has a secret identity.
Mhm.
So she really grapples with that question of which one is the real me, and there doesn't seem to be an easy way to integrate them for her because they're so vastly different sets of wants and desires.
Mhm. I love it. The
See, now you gotta go.
conflict, the conflict and the drama. That's what it. That's the whole point of. I know there's a lot of superheroes that don't have secret identities in the indie fiction world now because some people see it as cliche. But I like the drama of you're trying to balance two worlds because it is so relatable to a lot of people. Like there's a lot of people that, I mean, you could say it's like, how do you balance being a parent and then also going out and working for your living? So it's like that sort of very,
Right.
very relatable.
And I will say that in books two, and especially in book three, there's kind of this running joke of she doesn't do that much different except wear street clothes.
Mhm.
And but there's such an expectation from the general public of what this woman must look like every day that they look at her and they can look, she's standing in the grocery store and there's this tabloid with her on the cover and women are walking right by her on the line and going, oh, I can't believe she's wearing that.
Oh, geez, no. It's like the one day you don't go to work wearing makeup or something, or
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't wear that warrior gear, that leather armor. What kind of who dresses like that? Who even looks like that? And she's literally like right behind them with her grocery cart.
uh,
And they literally look at her and doesn't even occur to them that they're the same person. And there
mhm,
are tabloid stories all the time about is the emissary, her character's name, cheating on the civilian person that's known to be Daniel's girlfriend.
Mhm.
Which one will he choose?
Oh, geez. Yup. It's like, hey, well, if only you knew.
And she's sensitive about it. So, Daniel cracks a joke about it. Well, it'd be nice if there were two of you. But she still isn't quite getting the human thing. She doesn't get figures of speech even all that well. And her reaction is, I'm not enough.
Mm-hmm.
I have to choose an identity. I'm not enough. And that's I think probably her major inner conflict. What is enough for her as opposed to somebody else?
Definitely. Let me ask my next question for you, which is kind of, I mean, it all sort of builds upon itself, but the world that these characters all inhabit, is it mostly our reality, or is it kind of like a fictionalized version of our society?
It's almost identical to our own society. Most of the action takes place in modern day Washington, D.C. The only difference is people kind of take it for granted that there's this group of half a dozen powered people that you see running around catching bad guys from time to time. You see them in the papers. And the same. They're also in New York and a few other places. The real culture shock, it happens two ways. One is because there are a lot of flashbacks to 1930s and 40s New York, which took no small amount of research. And the other is where Nina is from, where she's revered as a goddess and she has a different name. That plane of existence is between Earth and the home of the city of the gods. And in that place, women are the superior warriors. They keep to themselves. The leader of that place keeps men as slaves for hard labor. And mostly people look at them with either disdain or pity because they're just so inferior. So as the demigoddess of that plane, Nina has a lot of adjusting to do when she comes to terms with, again, what it means to be human.
Well, this is quite the shift. I feel like I've seen that only a couple of times where it's like the society, I mean, that opens up a lot of struggles for her right there, being like, okay, so I come from a place where the women are in charge and we make the rules, and it's like, okay, totally opposite, where now you have to like fight for your piece of the pie and get your place in society.
It works kind of strangely backwards for her, because when we first meet her, for most of the first book, she thinks that she's just a regular human woman who doesn't remember anything about her past. And it isn't until other people from a cult that worships her show up demanding she return to her rightful place that something clicks. And I remember who I am. And then she goes and kills like 30 people who are attacking her friends. So she has to kind of retrofit what she knows about how she was created and what she exists for, versus she's made friends with these people. She's fallen in love with one of these people and they're men. And all of a sudden she realizes it never would have occurred to me to even think twice about being with a man or having a conversation as an equal with them. And now people are leering at me. People are objectifying me. They're saying rude things in when they stick a camera in front of my face. What is this?
It's very,
there's
very
a lot
timely. Yes, I feel like it's such a timely. That's like a timely theme, because there's a lot of people that are growing up in this current era where they've been taught certain values, whether they like it or not. And once you're able to decide for yourself, you have to sort of like take away the bits that you don't want and then develop the ones that you do. And sometimes it's like more difficult to let go of things that are just kind of like ingrained into you from like the moment you're born and able to learn something. So I feel like that's a very very relevant thing for characters to be struggling with.
And actually, the bigger and more obvious struggle comes with the book that's coming out in December, which focuses on two of the side characters from the trilogy. So one of them, Kevin, the one who was the injured veteran, was the sole survivor of an attack on a helicopter. And he's decided that he's going to commit himself to living the life that he knew all of his colleagues would have wanted. He's going to finally do right by his longtime girlfriend. He's going to get married. They're going to have kids. They're going to settle down. He doesn't want any of this. And so he grapples with what he's supposed to do with his life now that he's the only one left from what he knew of his life before. And Graham starts out as a good old boy from Georgia. He just became a ranger. He's a crack shot. He's uncannily good at what he does. And he takes home another woman like every night or two. And then he falls in love with his friend Stephen.
Oh.
And then we meet his family talking about his little brother going off to college in the north, and I hope they don't meet any faggots there.
Oh, jeez.
And why isn't Graham out in the Middle East shooting those towel heads? And so he has to figure out emotionally who he really is and how much of his life up until this point has been an act without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so interesting. That's such an interesting like setup. I'm always drawn to like, because I think about how as human beings we think in our minds that like, okay, we're as developed as we're going to be personally, and then there's always like, oh great, the wrench had to be thrown in, and then you have to address it for yourself. And I've known people that have completely ignored things that they should have dealt with, and it's like, you're gonna have to deal with it sometime.
Yeah, bite you in the ass.
Yes. So I feel like that's good. That's going to be a pretty exciting sort of plot to develop.
I hope so. You know, I one of my favorite bad reviews, and we all get bad reviews, and mine have mostly been very positive, maybe one or two, 2 stars and small handful of 3s. But and the rest I have over 100 reviews, and most of them are positive. But anyway, my favorite one was this guy who started out by saying, "This isn't a review that's going to end well. Let me tell you what this book reminds me of." And he said, "I would place this book right alongside J.R. Tolkien, Dostoevsky, and William S. Gibson." And I'm going, great, because
that doesn't sound so bad.
Because I start right in the middle of the action without any world building first, which is not really true, just like William S. Gibson does. And because he'll also kind of throw you right into the middle where you have to figure things out from the character's perspective. He compared me to Tolkien because there's a lot of attention to detail, which I also get into arguments about with other writers about, and I'll get back to that. But the best was and Dostoevsky because they're all so depressed.
I mean, we have to have the characters start somewhere.
Why are they always getting beaten? It's because otherwise they're not very interesting. They've got to learn and grow and figure out how to fight this thing.
Exactly.
There has to be a character arc.
Yeah, nobody wants. Well, it's either cheesy to have your character be totally happy and content and then end their life happy and content at the end, or the worst one for me is they're totally happy and then by the end they're depressed and they don't want to go on, and then I feel like, why did I take this journey with you? Right. And
I think it's all a matter of just how layered the writing is. I mean, it could go either way and be a good story. It's really just technique.
Mm-hmm.
And my editors, I work with 2 of them, and my editors both are all about painting the scene and emphasizing that your reader sees what the character sees, and what the character sees is who they are. We see their perspective. So what do they focus on? What has particular meaning to them? What do they look around to grab when they need some sort of quick modified weapon or makeshift weapon? And how do they view the world? How do they view each other? So I think I don't go into Stephen King level, every little blade of grass kind of thing. But I
Yes.
spend some time on it. And for some people, the biggest thing I get with people that go into the stories expecting a superhero action book is it moves slowly. It moves. It's not, there aren't any places that are really static, but it's paced very, very evenly to build up to to what the characters need in order to grow and change.
Mm-hmm.
At
Yeah,
least
because not everything I mean, there's a ton of flavors of superhero fiction out there, and there's only going to be more, I would imagine, as we go along. But not everything it needs to be like bombastic, epic. Like the stakes are different, like you say, depending on your characters and what their goals are. If their goals are interpersonal, I mean, there's no reason they have to be saving the entire world when really all they want to do is save a relationship or get a promotion or whatever it is.
Relationship and saving the world sometimes. And there's nothing wrong with the lighter affair. Just because I write that doesn't mean everybody has to. I love the old black and white Batman serials and the 1960s ones with all that camp and the bright colors and Sid Caesar as the Joker. That stuff is great. And again, it's a matter of what you gravitate towards. Not everybody's going to like everything.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So turning on that note, what are some of the things that you gained inspiration from as you worked on these superhero books?
Like I said, I got that question a lot, especially when the trilogy was in its beta stage, because the superhero plot was secondary in the beginning to the interpersonal plots.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted was the characters to have to not depend on being superheroes at all. There's this concept in yoga of what happens when you completely let go. When every crutch that you lean on, everything you think supports you and defines you and makes you who you are, falls away. It all falls apart. Then you have to sit in and rest in the understanding of your real truest self and find your real power. And that makes a lot of sense to me, especially if you have really, really unusual, large powers or abilities. So I had this idea that I wanted to see these really, really powerful people who a lot of people depend on have to find their inner strength and resilience rather than depend on speed or strength.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of technique, the way I plot is based on another hobby of mine. I play tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yes.
And I even once played a superhero RPG campaign called Champions. And my husband is a GM for some games, or a DM. And I worked out the characters' abilities and hindrances and what kinds of things to throw into some situations based on how I do character sheets. Okay, so what's their con? What's their wisdom? What's their charisma?
Mm-hmm.
What's their strength? Where do I have to put the lowest statistic? And sometimes for the book that I'm working on right now that's with the editor, I actually drew out a hex map with different colors. I rolled dice to see who went first.
Oh my gosh.
This person is going to have a lot more turns because she's faster than this person whose main characteristic is strength. So he's still going to be fighting this one. Well, she's already moved on to this spot. It was a mess. It was a nightmare. Those big battle scenes are really hard. But gaming was my savior with this. Aside from that, I had 3 idols growing up, and like most little girls, Wonder Woman was at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. But also Princess Leia, because she was so badass, and Emma Peel, because she was so amazing. And Nina draws on all 3 of those in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I love the image of having to roll dice and being like, okay, I guess you're going again.
This person has this one thing that comes up periodically as a hindrance, and let's see if it happens now. Yep, there it is. They're going to trip over a rock with other trying to.
It's like keeps it so fresh as you're working on it. Oh goodness. So my next question for you is, and you can avoid spoilers if there's spoilerific stuff, but do you have a specific plot thread or a twist that you came up with or that came to you as you were writing that you thought, oh yeah, I can't believe this is actually just coming out of my fingers onto the page?
For the trilogy in book 2, when the person or people behind what's been happening in the world are revealed, it was an aha moment. Oh my God, now it makes sense. Now this is brilliant. Still, of course, a lot of later times when I'm like, this is stupid. I'm just hitting delete. But for Graham and Kevin's book, Wise Men, I would have to say it's Graham's journey, where again, his talent and power literally are meaningless in the face of what he's up against and the decisions he has to make. So he has to make all these radical changes about his life, and Kevin does too. In the trilogy, it's about Daniel coming to terms with his past and being able to let it go. And it turns out, because of what's happening and why, that is a spectacularly difficult thing for him to do.
I think one of the things that's interesting, that the character's development is like one of the things that you point out, because I am, as a writer, sometimes it's like we plan as much as we can and we hope that something like a character arc is successful, and you hope that there's enough change for the character. But it's always terrifying to put something out and be thinking, did I really do enough to give this character's story justice? Or are readers going to think like, oh, they're back there, they didn't really move that far from where they began?
And I've got to say that this is where a good editor really comes in handy. Because my first editor, Gary, who did the trilogy with me, first of all, the trilogy was one huge behemoth of a book that he helped me break up, because he said, you're not even going to be able to put binding around this thing. So that's why it's serialized. But he really made me push some of the characters. He made me put them into situations and do things to them. I loved them too much, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. And he said, this will make it a better story. Or he will point out, and as does my other editor now with the other book, this character is not acting consistently with how we have seen her before. So which is it? And that's really where the character arc gets smoothed out, because the plot can still be in place, even if you're just kind of making it up like I do as you go along. But the way the character has to react has to build on whatever came before that, so that they can grow. And if they do something totally out of character, sometimes it takes an editor to show you that.
Or if they do something totally out of character, there better be another character that knows them well enough to point it out, so that it becomes part of your plot beats.
Yeah. And I do that often, especially in the trilogy, because for a series that is so heavy on romance, I don't really like romance novels that much. I think that of all the genres, it is the most dependent on tropes and cliches and really weird euphemistic language that I refuse to use. And I kind of broke away from the mold a lot with that, because again, I had to do it my way. But Gary told me, my editor, that this is going to be hard to market, because, and it's true, people that wanted the romance want to just slap the characters by the end of the third book. Just do it already.
Yeah. Yes.
Because in a romance, it happens. The characters hook up much earlier most of the time. And if it's a slow burn kind of romance, or it's a sweet romance, then they don't hook up at all to the visceral extent that I give it to you at the end of that book. So you like I said, you can't make anyone happy, but it's not, the book really isn't one thing or another in that sense.
Mhm. So which this one isn't on my list, but since we're talking about the romance genre and tropes, were there any that you started off with immediately saying, nope, I am not going to do this. I hate this.
That reminds me why I even brought that up. But yeah, you will not find any wet love caves, throbbing members, anything like that. Canals, trains, whatever. No. And
Trains.
I get my editor was telling me some of the really weird ones that he's come across, and he was kind of glad to see it. I kind of make it a running joke eventually because Daniel was brought up in a very different time in a conservative religious household,
Yes.
and pleasure in and of itself is something to ask God's forgiveness for. And is the daughter of the goddess of love, sex, and war, because in Sumeria they combined those things for some reason. And so she is all about trying on new words and being very direct, and he's barely able to get the technical word to roll off his tongue.
Yeah.
That thing. Can we do that? Is that okay?
It's like I would do diagrams for you, but I'm too embarrassed to even. Oh, love it. That's
But
part of the excitement of reading any sort of romance is it's such an awkward, and I've read a couple of books because I did try to write romance once and it wasn't super successful. I enjoy it in certain mediums, but I don't think I'm like super suited to coming up with my own. But it's like the the characters are from the get-go gonna either be super like awkward about it because it's such an awkward situation to be in. You're dealing with a totally separate entity from yourself, and like your characters are total opposites. So it's like they have to come to a middle ground, and like there's push and pull on both of them, I would imagine.
right. And the first book, there's a run. Somebody asked if where I got these quotations from because they looked them up and couldn't find them. And I said I made up the Sumerian legends that that this follows. The idea was they used this metaphor of a lion in the myth, and that the lion of the world of Gilgamesh, the world of man, is going to be fated to meet with the demigoddess of the heavens, and they are going to have to be together. And they're fated to be together if the world and every realm of existence in between is to be saved.
Mm-hmm.
So they're fated to be together. There's something underlying there, no matter what. And then it's just a matter of logistics. But I did find moments where I knew I was running awfully close to the stereotypes and the heavy leaning on tropes that I see in romance novels a lot. And so I usually just make fun of them myself. There's a point where Miriam, the speedster, is trying to intervene. And Daniel looks at her and said, "This isn't high school. Leave me alone. We're grown-ups."
Yes. It's like, come on, we've evolved a little bit, please. Goodness. So I have a couple more questions left. Because you said you have a book with the editor right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a set number of books that you would like to do in the series? And for the next one that's coming out, do you have anything that you can tease for the readers that they might look forward to?
Sure. There were 3 characters that people kept asking about and wanted stories for. One of them was Miriam. She was by far and away the most popular, and it took me a long time to kind of get into her head and figure her out because I thought it would be cool when she was just a plain, flat supporting character to make her former Mossad.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to write a book, and I'm like, I have to figure out research on Mossad. I am going to be on somebody's watch list somewhere. The more research I do on this. So she came last. The other ones were, why is Kevin such an asshole?
Hmm.
And what's the story with Graham? So I did Graham and Kevin together, and the teaser for the book at the very beginning of the description on the Amazon site is one man shouldn't be alive, one man shouldn't be in love, one man shouldn't exist, and none of them wanted to be superheroes.
Okay.
As far as Miriam's book, that's the end of the series. There are two other characters that I could have done, but I am not really all that interested in doing that. As much as I love my characters, I think they need to be able to say goodbye at some point from pick up all the real estate they've been occupying in my head.
Oh yes.
But so there is absolute closure by the time we get to book 5, and book 4 can actually be read out of order because it's a prequel.
Cool. It's such an interesting way to have it be like, okay, it's going to be, there's an ending. I feel like so many of these series and movies and TV, it's like they'll just go and go and go.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, it really does, you start a story to get to some sort of end. So I kind of like that. I mean, there's nothing that says the characters can't be revisited, but it's like you have a definitive ending that you're working towards, which I think is kind of like, it's refreshing for the genre that has so many seasons of television and so many long book series.
Yeah, and you can tell that the original writers had a concept of a story arc that had a beginning, middle, and end, and then they're told, here's some more money.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's going to be a whole book about the characters going out to eat and then having an argument. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Now, the big difference here is nobody is saying to me, here's a lot of money, keep going.
Yeah. So it's like, on the one hand, it's like, yes, I would love all the money, but then I was listening to an interview with one of the writers for the TV show Lost the other day, and they finally were allowed to speak about their writing process, where the interview was just direct, like, did you have an ending in mind? And the guy admitted, yes, I did. And it was supposed to be 3 seasons and done, but they kept telling me we want more. And then it took about a season and a half for the executives to figure out, oh, wow, we're stretching this out really far.
That's interesting because it was around the 4th season where my husband and I were both like, this is getting stupidly complicated. I'm stopping.
Yeah, it's like you can't just inject brand new ideas, because if it wasn't part of the plan to begin with, then it's just kind of like, oh boy, this is like not
kind of retrofit it so that there were seeds in place to begin with. And that was an interesting challenge writing a prequel because Kevin and Graham had been there the longest out of all the characters, so it made sense to start from their beginnings and write an origin story. But I had to think about what kinds of things they did and said in their futures to make their past theme consistent.
Absolutely. Oh. Writing is work, people.
Writing is work. It's work that, I used to get into discussions with a lot of people, often when I was trading beta reads with people, and I don't do that anymore because of this. But we would get into these arguments because they'd look at my books and they'd say, well, the bad guy, the action is supposed to happen a third of the way through. He's not there a third of the way through. This is a terrible book. You should read a book about how to write fiction. And I would usually say back, well, I have several of those books. My professors of fiction that I studied with wrote them. Which one did you have in mind? And then they type at me in all caps. But, it's, what was I even talking about? I would get in arguments with these writers because they would say, if you want your book to sell, it has to fit this particular formula. And I would say back to them, we are indie writers. Nobody is offering us huge deals. People with the success of, God help us, E.L. James, and people that come out of nowhere like J.K. Rowling are 1 in a million.
Yes.
And most of us are not going to make that kind of money. We might make a couple $1,000s, and some people manage somehow, but none of us are likely to have Penguin or HarperCollins next to our names. It doesn't work that way. I tried to shop around Wiseman, that two professional seasoned editors told me this needs to be traditionally published. I could not get an agent interested. I had hundreds and hundreds of rejections for over a year and a half. So I finally said, you know what, life is short. I want people to read this. And so what I tell them is, write because you love to, write because you have to, write because there's a story in you. Do it for the love because you can't count on the money.
It's such good advice. It's very down to earth advice that is true, because I find that whenever I focus on what can I write that will sell, it always locks me up, like no matter what. But then when I just let
romances is so hard.
Yeah, when I just let the idea come to me the way that it is, and then I work with it and I follow it, like, we are writers, but we also are the first readers of our own work. So I don't want to read a cookie cutter thing that is by the numbers. It's so predictable.
Right. And there's something to be said for that. Sometimes we're in the mood for that. We just want to know what to expect, and that's okay. It's not really my style of writing, though, and ultimately it's not really my style of reading. So I had to write what was most natural for me.
Absolutely. It's like the most foreshadowing I want is to know if the writer is going to have it end up on a positive note, or if I should expect a really depressing note.
I can tell you that bad things happen to people that we wish it wouldn't have, but ultimately everything's wrapped up and satisfying ending in all three major narratives.
Perfect. That's all I need to know.
So there's got to be some really bad, heavy, deep stuff, because that's how my book is themed.
Yes.
And it made sense. One of my the best compliment I got also was from an editor, which is part of the reason why it was such a great compliment, because he's seen thousands of books in his lifetime. He said that the relationship between my characters, but especially between Nina and Daniel, is, if not superficially, because they're a god and a hero, but emotionally and in terms of intimacy, the most realistic relationship he has read in a very long time.
Oh, wow. That is high praise. Especially for a romance. That's excellent.
And I keep reminding myself that every time I hear, but they didn't get together in the first third of the
book. Come on, people. I had to wait seasons of shows and for characters that I wanted to get together. So
I hate myself here, but how long did it take for Sam and Diane to get together in Cheers?
Oh my gosh. I remember, okay, this is off the rails for me, but I remember watching something about the show Lois and Clark, and the writers of that show were like, yeah, once we have Lois and Clark get together, what the heck are we going to do for tension and drama? Because when they're together and that's it. And then our job becomes a whole lot harder. So.
Yeah. And, with Fast Forward, the last book in the series, I put Nina and Daniel back in there as major characters. It's partly their perspective. And at that point, they've known each other for a longer time. They're more settled as a couple. So where do they go from here? There are still, anyone who's been in a relationship or is married knows it's not easy to be part of a couple 24/7. And if they're both still trying to figure out a lot of major issues with identity and communication, there's still plenty to work out. There's plenty of drama to be had. It's just going to be more, it's not going to be will they or won't they anymore. And I think there's a point where the readers really get tired of that, and they just say, you know what, get together, don't get together, I don't care, and walk away. So you've got to figure out something else to do with them.
Yes. There's lots of different types of tension you can have for the characters.
Yeah.
So I I don't have a whole lot left in my list, but if somebody is brand new to your series, would you recommend that they start at the trilogy, or can they start with the prequel?
They can do either. The only advantage of reading the trilogy first is that when you go to the prequel, you'll go, "Oh, I know those people."
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the prequel happens well before, pretty much well before Daniel is in the picture, and he's the focus of the trilogy along with Nina. And Nina doesn't come into the picture until much later either. So they can go either way. I'm kind of pushing book 4 right now because it's the new one, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking for ARC readers and pre-orders and all that kind of good stuff. If
Mm-hmm.
anyone wants to be an ARC reader, they can contact me at my website. Please. But
Yes.
yeah, either way would work.
Excellent. So this next one is not on my list before I have you wrap it up with where people can find you, but is there anything that I have not touched upon that you would like to talk about?
Um, I don't think so. I have such a penchant for going way off topic to begin with. I'm happy that there was someone here kind of guiding me through it.
That's why when I originally started thinking about the framework of the podcast, like a month before I recorded the first one, I said, okay, I need to have a list of questions because it is way too easy for me to just talk forever.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all right. So for your part of the wrap up, where can readers go to find your books, and where on the internet can they go if they want to get in touch with you?
My books are available on Amazon, and Wiseman will be available in paperback, but not yet because I messed up the publication date. I'd have to reformat the whole thing if I fixed it. It'll go live eventually, though. But all of the books are available as Kindle books. They're available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're part of that program, you can get them for free. My last name is Janowsky, and my website is karenjanowsky.com. I'm also available on Facebook. I'm on Facebook all the time. I have a group as well as my author page. The group is called Superheroes in Love, and we talk about other things than superheroes hooking up. And we usually have a lot of fun. We usually have some good conversations with that. I'm also on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Pinterest. If you ever wonder how I envision what the characters look like, I've got some actors and actresses up there on that site.
Oh, cool.
But, I'm not that hard to find.
So if you're somebody looking to get into ARC reading, reach out now.
Yes, please, please. And if you go to the website, by all means, sign up for the newsletter. I give away books. I have free stuff all the time. There's a monthly raffle to get all of the books in paperback along with some swag. I sometimes will just do spur of the moment. This book is going to be free for a few days. Have at it. So you don't want to miss that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So there you have it, everybody. You know where to go. So now it's up to you. Go do it.
Woo! Go. Up and away. Or something.
Yes. So I will wrap this one up. Thank you very much for being on the show. It was honestly really enjoyable chatting about everything.
Thank you for inviting me.
You are so welcome. So let me wrap this one up for all the listeners out there. Wherever you're listening, whether it be on iTunes, YouTube, wherever, just make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the future episodes coming up. Give us a like. Let us know what you think by commenting. If you discuss any of the books that we discussed and you want to talk about spoilers, just give a spoiler tag so that we can skip on by if we haven't read that particular book. And as always, thank you everybody so much for tuning in. I appreciate you all, whether you're new or old to the podcast, and I will see you all next time.